The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending whenever you are. Warm welcome to today's ISQua webinar on truth and myth in giving a good presentation. This webinar will review some of the myths about giving a good presentation, cover some of the traps that even an experienced speaker can fall into, and give tips and suggestions for making presentations more memorable. I would like to welcome our today's presenter, Kim Oates, who is currently Director of Undergraduate Quality and Safety at the Clinical Excellence Commission in Sydney, Australia. He held the Chair of Pediatrics and Child Health at the University of Sydney from 1985 to 1997 and was simultaneously Chair of the Division of Medicine at the Children's Hospital in Sydney. He was an Chief Executive of the Children's Hospital from 1997 to 2006, a position which strengthened his passion for patient safety. He is an emeritus professor at the University of Sydney, where he is involved in curriculum development as well as teaching new concepts in medicine, including quality and safety. Just to remind you that today's presentation we will take approximately 30-40 minutes, and we will leave the remainder of the time for any questions that you might have. Please type your questions into the question or chat box provided, and they will be posed to Kim at the end of the session. As in connection to the topic of this webinar, Kim Oates acknowledges that he has committed all of the errors that will be discussed during this session, and he might be even doing some during the session, so keep alert to find them. Please enjoy the presentation, and over to you, Kim.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And many of us think that we're good presenters, and many of us think we're experienced, and most of us are. And that might make you think, well, only a foolish person would dare to give a talk about how to give a good talk, and perhaps that foolish person is me because I'm doing it. But I'm sure you've seen some brilliant presentations, and I'm sure you've seen some average presentations too. And what distinguishes the really good presentation from the sort of average presentation where your mind tends to wander is what this seminar is about, and some of the traps. If you go to an international conference, you really have a choice, particularly if you've flown halfway around the world to get there. Your choices are, when you sit down and the speaker gets up, to have a quick nap to help cope with the jet lag, to crane your neck around and look for friends and colleagues you haven't seen recently, to check your email, to flip through the program book to decide what session to go to next, or to have your attention grabbed and sustained by the presenter. And what is it that makes the difference? Well, I was at a international conference just last month, and there were some very good speakers, some very eminent speakers, but by the end of the day, every error that I'm going to mention today was committed by some of those people, and some of those people who are regarded as experts, but not necessarily as great speakers. So we can all improve, me too, and you can certainly be on the lookout for errors that I make today. So I'm going to go through a few headings. The first thing is understand the audience. If we have to speak somewhere, we need to know a little bit about the people we're speaking to. Who are they? What's their background? What's their experience? Do they know nothing about the subject? Do they know perhaps more than you? Why are they there? Some people go to conferences because they have to get up the correct number of continuing education points. Other people go because they want to meet a colleague. And we all know that morning tea is one of the best parts of a conference. Other people go because their boss said you have to go. So there are various motivations to go. It's worth finding out a bit about the audience, who they are, what's their background, why they're there, and what they need to know. And once you know a little bit about the audience, then you can know what they need to know. And what they need to know is the key thing that we as the presenter have to give them. And of course, what's in it for them is really in line with why they're there. Continuing education points, meet your college, increase their skills, they might be there. They're all legitimate. But the aim of a good talk really is like a good meal. At the end of a really good meal, you don't feel so full that you don't want to eat again for an hour. You feel as if you'd just like a little bit more. And that's a really good presentation. It could leave you with a feeling that that was really interesting and I wouldn't mind a little bit more of that. That's a nice way to leave your audience. So part of understanding the audience is learning something about them. Learn something about them in advance if you get the chance. Be on the lookout for opportunities. So you might, in the session beforehand, be outside talking to the audience, and you might meet some people. You might learn their names, and you might be able to when talking at the beginning, after you've been introduced, mention the name of the person you were talking to. That's terrific, great for the person, but it also lets the audience know you're really interested in them as people. Or look out for opportunities as well. I heard, I was in Turku in Finland, and I heard the guest speaker there get up and say, I'm really pleased to be in Turku, Finland, because Turku is the town that Paavo Nurmi comes from. Now most Westerners, or most people not from Finland wouldn't know that, but athletes would know. Paavo Nurmi was the Finnish long-distance championship. In the 1924 Olympics, he won the 5 kilometres, the 10 kilometres, he won 5 gold medals, and he's worshipped, particularly in that part of Finland. And once the speaker had said that, he had the audience in their hands. So be on the lookout. I said to the speaker later on, how did you know that? And he said, I was just going for a walk along the downtown the night before, and I came across this statue and I had a look at it. It was about Paavo Nurmi. So I Googled him up and learned all about him, and I used it. Now it's not dishonest to do that, but at least it does show some involvement and interest in the audience. You might find, depending on the size, you can ask people at the start where they're from, what country they're from, what different countries, put their hands up, what disciplines do you represent. That sort of thing gets audience participation, and at least it lets them know that you haven't just got a set talk that you give to everybody exactly the same, that you're interested in them. So try to understand the audience. There are a number of myths as well, and I've heard people say very seriously, a good presentation means 1 slide per minute. If you've got a 40-minute presentation and you've got 60 slides, cut them down to 20. Now, really, I think that's totally wrong because, of course, it depends on how much information is on the slide. So that's one of the myths. 1 slide a minute is wrong. You can have fewer than 1 slide a minute, less than 1 slide a minute. The other myth is that if you're an expert in your field, you're a good presenter. And I'm sure you've heard experts who give terrible talks, and we've all suffered that way. And the way to become a good speaker is to practice and get good at it. And I'll talk more about that later on. One of the other views is that expert speakers just get up and speak well off the cuff, speak well without any preparation, without any notes. They just seem to be able to get up there and do it. And I used to think that was true, and I envied these people enormously. And when I was a registrar, I envied my boss. I thought, this person is a marvellous speaker. And there was going to be grand rounds this afternoon, and he was giving a presentation that afternoon. And about an hour before the presentation, I went round to his office because I had to ask him about a patient. And I was about to knock on the door, and I thought I could hear voices inside the office. And I listened carefully, reluctant to go in, and it was my boss pacing up and down inside the office, rehearsing his talk, rehearsing, and getting it just right. When grand rounds came, he got up and gave the talk. It looked as if it was a perfectly formulated talk done without preparation, off the cuff. But he was an expert and he knew the value of rehearsal. So that's another myth, that really good speakers don't speak off the cuff. Really good speakers prepare. The next point is don't forget the talk is not all about us, it's all about the audience. It's not all about you, it's all about them. And it's very tempting to give a talk all about you. A talk about you is to impress the audience about how much you know on the subject. Now, we're an expert in the field, and we do know a lot about the subject, but the real aim is to help the audience learn some messages that you think are important and pitch at a level that will be appropriate for them. It's not about me as a speaker, it's about what the audience needs to know. And that makes you think about stories about yourself. Stories about yourself can be quite effective as long as they're stories, and I guess this is a personal view, if they're stories told at your own expense. If there's a story about what an amazing thing you did, that doesn't impress the audience nearly as much as a story about something you got wrong, or a story told at your own expense. So stories about yourself are okay, but just make sure the presentation is not about me, it's about you. It's about what the audience needs to know. So we'll go through the talk, and the first part is the delivery, and it's really good to start with a bang. To start off in a way that grabs the audience's attention. That person that's sitting there flipping through the program suddenly sits up and pays attention because something really interesting is happening up there on that stage. So last week I was at I heard an oration, and the speaker was introduced, and the speaker got up, rather like a TED talk, mic'd up, roving mic, which was useful, and started off like this. He didn't start off saying, thanks for inviting me, this is the learning objectives. He started off like this. It was a Monday morning in January 1967. I was the orthopaedic intern at St George Hospital. I was just 23 years old. I'd been an intern for just 2 weeks and it was frantically busy. My pager was going off. I had 3 admissions waiting in the emergency department. My patients were scattered across 4 wards, all with drugs to write up. Families and relatives were calling me about their loved ones, wondering when they'd be able to go home. And my registrar was in theatre. I was alone with multiple distractions. Mr. Bedford, who had a fractured neck of femur, developed heart failure, and I was told to commence him on digoxin. Now, digoxin is a very powerful drug that stimulates the heart muscle, but it's also a very dangerous drug that, in an overdose, can cause death. Well, I knew the dose. I wrote up the dose in his chart, knowing the dose wasn't a problem, but in the rush to get through the work, and with the multiple constant interruptions, I didn't notice that I'd accidentally put the decimal point in the wrong place. And now my patient is being prescribed 10 times the amount of digoxin, a fatal dose. The drug is drawn up by a junior nurse who approaches the patient armed with a lethal injection. Soon Mr. Bedford will die. The speaker then went on to say, well, I'll come back to that story later on, and thank you for inviting me to give this oration, and then did the normal niceties. But the audience was grabbed, and they were waiting to see what would happen. They were worried about Mr. Bedford and what would happen to him. So starting with a bang is quite helpful, and that's related to the next bit. Grab their attention at the start, and it's good to think in advance, how can I grab the attention of the audience at the start? I think many lectures start off with a list of learning objectives. And learning objectives, for all their value, and I'm an educator as well, I know they're valuable, they don't really grab the audience at the start. Learning objectives can be saved for the handout. The handout should really be quite different from the slides. It's a lazy handout where you do slides. The handout can have information that complements the slides. It's all right to start off and say, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to get there, a little summary, but listing 12 learning objectives tends to put people up. Save the learning objectives for the handout, use them by all means, try to avoid jargon, and start off perhaps with, this is where I'm going to take you, and this is how together we're going to get there. So that helps make your message memorable. And the next message after starting with a bang and trying to be memorable is to show passion. So how does a speaker show passion? Well, if they really love the subject, they'll be passionate about it. But you might want to think in advance of how you might be able to actually show enthusiasm for the subject by showing objects, by telling stories, and I'll come to stories later on because they're very powerful. I heard a speaker talking about hand washing. Now, hand washing and hand hygiene, we know, are crucial, but it's pretty hard to show passion about them. And this person said to the audience, I'm passionate about hand washing. The speaker said, I'm so passionate about it, he was a male speaker, I'm so passionate about it, I'm going to take off my shirt. Would anybody dare me to take off my shirt? So now the audience is engaged. They're wondering what's going to happen. A hand tentatively goes up, another hand goes up, and in a moment all the audience has got their hand up because they want this person to take their shirt off. He peels off his tie shirt, and underneath is a T-shirt with "Clean hands save lives" written on the T-shirt. That involved passion. It was an object lesson, and the audience was engaged. So start with a bang, show passion, and the next component of the delivery is use energy. Well, how can we use energy? We can move around, moving purposely, not sort of relentless pacing that irritates the audience, purposely moving around. Using our hands is very helpful, and modulating the tone of voice as well. Fast, slow, high, low, enthusiasm, speaking quickly when it gets exciting. We can use that energy and try to infect the audience with the energy. So we've done start with a bang, show passion, use energy, and the next useful part of delivery is telling stories. Now, telling stories is incredibly powerful. People remember stories. These are the benefits of the stories. They illustrate a point. People remember exactly what the story is. They'll often, after the lecture, remember the story and not much else. So you've got to clearly link the story to the message. But there are traps too in telling stories. Stories have to be concise. If they're too long, the audience might turn off. If they're not relevant, the audience might turn off. If they're not told well, the audience might turn off. If they're about something wonderful you did, that will just convince the audience that this presentation is all about you and not all about them. And one of the traps is not to rehearse. It's good to rehearse stories. I'm sure that person who told the story about Mr. Bedford being about to die had rehearsed that story again and again. Oh, by the way, Mr. Bedford didn't die. A nurse picked it up, and Mr. Bedford's life was saved, and the person telling the story then talked about what he learned from that incident, including enormous respect for nurses, which is a very important lesson for a young resident to learn. So there's some great benefits to stories, but there are some traps as well. So why do stories work? Well, they work when they're short, they work when they're memorable, they work when they're relevant, we've covered that, and they work when they're rehearsed. Short, memorable, relevant, and rehearsed. When might they not work? Well, when they're long, when they're garbled, when they're all about you. And I think a really valuable thing to know about stories is that if you get any group of people in any audience, a highly professional audience, an audience of lay people, an audience of people at school, people tend to fall into three broad categories. There's the sort of the logical people, and I guess they're the people like you and me, people with good education, understand scientific method, who are convinced by facts and figures. So that group of people is in the audience. We have to cater for them. There's also a group of people in any audience, people have described them as the formal group of people, the people who aren't quite sure which way to jump. The sort of people at a meeting when somebody asks for a show of hands and the person looks to their right, looks to their left, see where the hand's moving and tentatively puts their own hand up or keeps it down depending on the prevailing mood of the group. The third group of people in any audience is the emotional group, the people who are swayed by emotion and who are swayed by stories. And that's why stories are so powerful. And they're not three separate groups, they're overlapping groups. And the biggest group in any of those three groups, the emotional group, tends to be the majority. And logical people like you and me are swayed by stories as well. So stories can be very powerful when they work well with those three different types of people. I had a friend in advertising. He made television advertisements. And he'd often come over for dinner and we'd talk about an advertisement. And I'd say to him, I saw this wonderful advertisement on television. It was so funny. And I described it. And he said, Kim, what was the message? And I said, I can't remember what the product was, but it was a really good advertisement. And he said that was a terrible advertisement because it was the advertisement was so funny that people didn't actually remember the message or what the product was. So one of the other traps in telling stories and using videos is that the video should illustrate the message but mustn't be so good you forget the message. So I'll show you a little video and you can just think to yourself whether this obscures the message. The message is basically about get all the information before you make a decision, as you would do in clinical work. Get the information before you make a decision. Don't jump to conclusions. But see if you can remember the message at the end of this. So that's pretty funny, or I thought it was funny when I saw it anyhow. But we have to be careful. Can you remember the message? The message was get a full history, get all the information before you make a decision, don't jump to conclusions. So if you're often using a very humorous message, you need to emphasize the message at the beginning, tell the funny story, emphasize the message at the end of the story, because you don't want the story to be so good that the message is missed totally. So we've done Start with a Bang. You talked about passion, energy, telling stories. It's good to engage the audience. Well, in fact, if you've done numbers 1 to 4, you've engaged the audience very effectively. They're there, they're listening, they're wondering what's going to happen next. They're really interested, particularly if you tell a story and leave it hanging and then come back to it, finish it later on. And as well as engaging the audience, it's good to involve the audience. Number 6 on this slide. Start with a bang, show passion, use energy, tell stories, engage the audience and involve them. Well, how can we involve the audience? Well, walking around is good. There's no reason why people have to stay behind the rostrum all the time. Walking up and down the corridor of the aisles in an audience if you're teaching is helpful. Encourage answers, ask questions. No reason why presentations can't be interactive with information from the audience. People in a big audience are often reluctant to be the first to speak, but once you get people speaking, it tends to get on a roll and keep happening. And it's always good to say, if you ask a question and somebody gives an answer, don't say, no, that's wrong. That'll certainly shut down any questions. Say, that's interesting, but what about? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So build on, even if it's the wrong answer, you can use it and build on it to the point. So there are 6 key things for delivery, and the overall message, and you've heard this many times, no, sorry, I've made an error. I've gone to the wrong slide. But anyhow, the next slide was other tips. Use rhythm. Rhythm's good. Use pauses. Remember that speaker I told you about the digoxin and the fatal dose for Mr. Bedford? That speaker used pauses, a fatal dose, and then paused. Soon Mr. Bedford will die. Another pause. And pauses are very powerful. Rhythm, voice up and down, modulating it. Use appropriate body language. Some people just stare at one point behind the audience's head all the time. Look from side to side. Some people would call this being a lighthouse. It's certainly better to be a lighthouse and sweep across the audience, but not with the same clockwork speed as a lighthouse. But don't be a lamp pole, just looking straight ahead. Be a lighthouse, scan the audience, and remember that good data is that people learn best in 20-minute chunks. And the standard university lecture is 50 minutes or 55 minutes. So what do you do if you're given 50 minutes and you know that people learn best in 20-minute chunks? Well, I'm sure you've thought of things already. You can break the talk up. You can show a movie, a video clip. You can stop halfway through and have a couple of multiple choice questions. You can have some question and answer from the audience. There are lots of things you can do to remember that 20-minute segment where people learn best and break your talk up by often interactive things. And multiple choice questions as part of a presentation can be very, very effective. It just helps reinforce and revise what you've talked about. The next thing, of course, is to keep it simple. Everybody knows that. We know a lot. When we're giving a presentation, we want to get a lot of it out. We want to impress them with how much we know. But we have to remember that the audience, particularly if they're at a conference over several days, they're tired. They're busy. They're hearing lots of information. If you can just get 2 or 3 key points over that they remember, that would be a real achievement. So we think we have to cover a lot of ground. Keep it simple. Concentrate on the key points. Einstein gets... I don't know whether all of the quotes attributed to Einstein he actually said, but he's said to have said this: if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. And I think that's a valid point. So we've got all the techniques. Now we're going to look about how to structure the message that we're going to give. And there are various ways, various traps. One is you have to avoid the mystery tour. Now, if you go on a mystery tour around a graveyard at night, the guide knows where you're going, but the audience doesn't. You don't want to be the guide that you know where you're going, but the audience has no idea where you're going. Avoid the mystery tour. Avoid the maze. If a group of people go into a maze, nobody knows where they're going. The speaker doesn't, the audience doesn't either. And I'm sure you've all seen presentations that have sometimes been mystery tours or mazes. What do I mean by saying don't get it upside down? Well, I think it really helps at the beginning to let the audience know this is the main message. This is the message that you're going to take away at the end of the day. Then the content, how we got there, perhaps the experiment you did or the project you're on, and then at the end reinforce the main message. Sometimes people spend so much time preparing the audience for the main message with background data, lots of information, lots about how they got there, that the audience may be lost by the time the final message gets there. It's good to finish with a message. I think it's also good to start with a message. This is what I'm going to tell you. This is how we got to that point. This is what we found. I think that helps. And the last thing is so crucial, and I'm sure many of you have suffered at conferences where you've been the next to speak and the speaker ahead of you has gone over their time allocation. Very, very difficult if you're the next speaker, because you've prepared carefully for a 15-minute presentation and now you've got 11 minutes and you wonder what you're going to do. A good chairman can usually control the speakers, but they often don't. And so it's just good manners to fit precisely within their time allocation. And the way to do that is to rehearse the talk, not be on a mystery tour, know exactly where you're going, rehearse, and be respectful to other speakers. The structure also involves, as I've sort of mentioned in the last slide, really, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end. Seems so clear, doesn't it? The beginning is the bang. Start with the bang, grab their attention. The middle are the main points you want to get across. The end is the conclusion, and you might, in some instances, as I said, start with the conclusion as well. But you want a beginning, a middle, and an end. But often you'll go to talks, and the beginning starts off well, and then the speaker seems to get a bit lost. It's a beginning, a muddle, and an end. So just rehearsing and careful preparation avoids that muddle. If the muddle sometimes occurs, and you probably noticed, if the audience is overloaded with information. If we give the audience too much information, they switch off and it becomes a muddle. Now, there are a few simple things to avoid. Fidgeting. And funny, unusual mannerisms. It's often good to rehearse in front of a mirror, and we're often surprised at how much fidgeting and mannerisms we have. Try to control them, because they're distracting to the audience, and when the audience is distracted, they're missing the message. We need to dress well to present, and clothes that are very distracting, or a tie that's not straight. You know, the mothers in the audience all want to straighten the tie. They miss the point because they want to fix up the speaker. Talking in a monotone, just boring, going on and on, lots of information, but really no passion, doesn't help very much. And I know we often have to be behind the rostrum because we need to work our slides, but if we can get out from the rostrum, it engages the audience much more. And if you can organise to have a remote slide changer and a lapel microphone or a head mic. That makes an enormous difference. You've got to know your talk well and prepare it. But to be able to walk around on the stage, get off the stage, talk to audience, is better than just being there behind the rostrum all the time. So some of those fairly simple things are worth avoiding and using. Takes a while. And I'm sure you will watch TED Talks when you get the time. TED Talks are really great examples often of great speakers who prepared well, who have good slides, and who aren't afraid of being out exposed and don't need to hide behind the rostrum. And then there are a few things we say that don't mean anything. The ums and ahs all the time. Just did one then. Ums and ahs are a problem. Going forward tends to be a phrase that's popular at the moment. I've got no idea what it means. At the end of the day is another one. In this day and age is another one. Often those phrases, when I hear them, I think, well, the speaker's not quite sure what's going on, are they? So they're just filling in with some meaningless words. And they irritate some people. So some of those meaningless phrases and jargon in all their forms doesn't help. We all have our favourite phrases, and it's worth asking ourselves, do these favourite phrases we have add value? And when we rehearse the talk, especially if we rehearse it in front of somebody else, as I'll come to later on, that sometimes gets picked up. Now, there's some common errors which you may have committed. Slides with far too much information. Some slides have so much information on you can't see them, you can't read them, and then to compound the insult, the speaker says, I'm really sorry that this is a busy slide. Busy slide is really code for saying there's far too much data on this slide and you can't read it, and I don't have time to explain it. So never apologise for a slide. The answer is don't show slides that need apologising for. Flipping back to an earlier slide, I better go back and show you that one. The solution, of course, if you want to repeat a particular point, is just duplicate the slide and put it further on in the presentation where you find it. Very popular to talk to the screen and not to the audience, but it's good to talk to the audience. They're there to hear you. They don't want you having your back to them and talking to the screen. One of the other things you've sometimes seen, and I'm sure I've done it, and you may have done it too, a slide comes up and you look a bit stunned because you didn't expect it to be there. And that's really saying to the audience, this stunned speaker actually isn't sure what's going on and hasn't prepared very carefully. So try to avoid this looking stunned when a slide comes up, and that's avoided through rehearsal. If you've got a lot of information, that slide with too much information, you might want to turn that into a handout. And then you can put up the slide with 3 key points on it and give the handout instead. And very experienced presenters still have errors that trip them up. Not having a spare copy of the presentation is a trap. If you're going overseas, it's often good travelling to have a spare copy. I know people who put a copy in their carry-on luggage and a copy in their checked luggage to make sure they don't lose it. Have a spare copy of your USB. Embedding a video in a presentation is a real trap unless you're sure it's going to work. So it's good to get there early, check out the room in advance, make sure you know how the projector works, talk to the audio-visual person, make sure that the video works, make sure that the sound on the video works. And the trap is most embedded videos play from the USB but often don't play when the presentation is transferred to the projector. So it's good to do your presentation off your USB if you want your videos to work. And the other thing that you often hear people say, oh look, this is actually a 45-minute talk, but I've only been given 15 minutes, so I'll have to rush. I'm sorry. That's hopeless. Saying you really need more time is an insult. If you're given 15 minutes for a talk, you prepare a really good talk that lasts 15 minutes. So even experienced presenters do that sometime. PowerPoint, we all use PowerPoint. We love PowerPoint. There are some benefits, but there are still some hazards. Of course, the benefits, you can show really useful information, but the hazards are too much data. The hazards are that sometimes PowerPoint is just too easy to use. You can add extra data, and sometimes is an excuse for not doing thorough presentation. PowerPoint's wonderful, but we have to be careful we don't have death by data where people just miss out on there's so much data in the PowerPoint, they just fall asleep. So, some of the PowerPoint messages are avoid too much data. I've already done that. The other useful thing to think is, could I give this talk if I didn't have PowerPoint? And really, we should be able to give the talk if PowerPoint fails. And it follows from that our preparation, our slide preparation, should come last. And it's very tempting, and I'm sure many of us do it, and I've done it many times too. We prepare our slides and then we prepare our talk. It will be a more powerful talk if we prepare our talk, decide what we want to do, and then prepare the slides that fit with the talk. Doesn't mean we can't go through our old slide library and pull out the occasional relevant one, but that's much more powerful than just going through your slide library and pulling together 20 or 30 slides that you think will probably do a fair job. Prepare the talk first, then the PowerPoint afterwards. So, fancy PowerPoint is a problem. The main thing is that we want to impress the audience in a way that will help them learn and understand. We don't want to impress the audience about how clever we are with PowerPoint. And so we need to keep it fairly simple. PowerPoint presentation where things are whizzing in and out and lots of effects make some people in the audience dizzy and sometimes distract from the presentation. And the slide has to be readable. This is an example, and you might be able to read this. And I've purposely made it like this, but if they can't read the slide easily, it's a worthless slide. And as well as having a font that helps, you need a background that helps as well. Again, if they can't read the slide easily, it's worthless, and a poor background makes it worse. We need a background that corresponds well with the font. So I've really covered this about when you should create your slides. The temptation is to make the slides, then just turn them into a talk. The best thing to do is create your talk, decide what you want to say, the key things you want to get across, and then prepare your PowerPoint around that after you've prepared the talk. A few traps and hazards with PowerPoint mightn't work. Well, the solution, always have a spare USB in your back pocket, have a spare one in your briefcase, go in there and rehearse and make sure it works before the audience comes. PowerPoint may be so distracting with so many objects and movements and things going on that the audience misses the point, so keep it simple. Embedding a video that won't play, I've mentioned already, the solution is to run it off the USB and make sure it works on the equipment that you're going to use. So that means and talking to the AV people. If you bring the wrong USB, that's pretty difficult, but if you have a backup USB, probably the backup one will be okay. And one of the problems is if you're going to rove and walk around the audience, just see where the projector light is and try to avoid that or not look into it, because there's nothing worse for the speaker than walking across the stage and looking up and suddenly being blinded by the projector light. So work out where the projector light is, and when you're walking, try to avoid it. So we're nearly finished, and I'm just going to talk about ways of finishing. And I'm sure you've seen all of these things. One way of finishing is the crash landing. The person talks and talks, and then suddenly the talk's over. And the audience is surprised that it's been a crash landing. The other type of finishing is when they can't quite finish. They circle. You think the talk's nearly at the end, and then they circle around once more, and they haven't quite finished, and they circle around once more. They're sort of unable to finish, and all of these are to do with lack of rehearsal and preparation, and the type of talk you want to give is the smooth landing, where it's quite clear, you come in bump-free, the audience knows what's going on. And the smooth landing involves a concise summing up of your main points, and if there's time for discussion, and this is one of the things you need, perhaps anticipate some of the questions that you might get, because then you could have thought about them and prepared them. And if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know the answer. People don't mind honest speakers. They prefer honest speakers. If they don't know, that's reassuring for the audience that the experts have things to learn as well. My third last slide, rehearse. And it's good to rehearse standing up. Our voice carries better standing up. When we do the presentation, we'll be standing, so rehearse standing. It's good to rehearse out loud, so you've got to shut yourself in a room, rehearse with your slides to get your timing right, then rehearse in front of somebody, a friend or a colleague. Say, can you just give me 30 minutes? I just want to run this talk by you, and stand up with your slides and pop them in the audience and just do the talk and rehearse again and again and again. And that's what my boss, remember that time I said when I was a registrar, I was going to knock on my boss's door, I could hear talking, and it was this person rehearsing out loud, walking and presenting, getting ready to present, which was a really good talk. And the second last slide is this. This is serious. Rehearsing is important. And I'm just saying it again, rehearse standing, rehearse out loud, rehearse with our slides, rehearse in front of somebody, that's not easy, and rehearse again and again. And just a couple of people to thank from the Clinical Excellence Commission, Yvette Bueno, a colleague and co-conspirator who's helped me, and we've talked together about this sort of thing. There are two very good books, Emma Ledden, the presentation books, got some great insights, and Susan Weinschenk, in 100 Things Every Presenter Needs to Know, also has some very good points. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim, for this excellent presentation. I'm sure we will have fantastic presenters following this presentation. We do have a number of questions, and we would like to start the Q&A session now. Anybody else who would like to pose the question to Kim, please type them into the chat or question box provided. So the first question is, what are the best techniques of delivering a short presentation? Because most of the techniques that you have mentioned, like connecting with the audience, short stories, videos, are physically not possible.
Yes, very good, very good point. And many of the presentations, certainly in the scientific world, you often have 10 minutes plus 5 minutes of discussion. I think some of the techniques I've mentioned are still very effective there. You can start with a bang and grab their attention. Telling stories takes a bit longer, but if it's a story relevant to the work, that helps. And just remember the main points and sum up. The stuff that you don't have time to do, put in the handout. It is harder with a short talk, and in fact, it's much harder to prepare a 10-minute really good talk than it is to prepare a 45-minute talk. And that, again, it means careful presentation and rehearsing. But I agree. It's the shorter the talk, the tougher the job.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is, what are the techniques or approaches of understanding the audience, especially in the cases where a speaker didn't have access to the info about the participants of the session?
And that's a typical problem we all have, because we haven't had a chance to meet the audience, so that's a very, very valuable question. And of course, all of the things I've mentioned aren't essential every time, but if there is an opportunity to find out a bit about the audience, do it. You can do it at sort of, the pre-conference dinner or morning tea, or talk to the organisers. It helps to find a little bit about the audience and where they're from. You won't always do it, but even just meeting someone beforehand and mentioning a person by name, or the town you're in, or something pleasant that makes the audience feel, wow, this person really respects us and our town, is very helpful. It's a small investment, and I think it pays off, but it doesn't always work.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Ahmad Tirakji, and he's asking, he was asking that during the session you switched off your video. Was that something that was done intentionally for one of the errors that they were meant to pick up, or were there any other reasons for doing so?
Oh, what a wonderful question that was. Well, I've just switched it back on, and I had no idea that I'd switched it off. That's partly to do with my technical ineptitude, but thanks for picking that up. And I'm glad you were on the lookout for errors, and that was a major one you found, so thank you. And I'm sure many of you others have noticed quite a few errors as well, which is all part of the fun.
They are actually doing that, so we will summarize. Some of them are actually excellent pickups, and we will read all of them at the end of the session, so we can summarize and look at them all. One active participant, Sharada, is actually looking through your presentation and trying his best to identify the errors, and yet the remainder of the participants are also welcome to do so. But at the moment, we will address the question from Yasser. Amar, and he's asking, his question relates to do it with the bang or start it with the bang. And he's asking, would a real life scenario be appropriate to start with the bang, or could the fiction or joke do the job as well?
Thanks, Yasser. That's a good question. I would think, I mean, the humour is a problem. It can be very effective. It rarely works well with an international audience because different ethnic groups have different types of humour. It never works with simultaneous translation because a good joke is all about the timing, and when there's simultaneous translation, the timing's lost. So a real life humour's fine and it's okay, but I personally prefer to start off with a real life story. Something I saw, something I did. I mean, I'll give you an example. Now I'm going to make another error because I'm going to talk about myself. But when I talk to students about the dangers of peer pressure, I say to them, I was waiting at the traffic lights to come to this lecture theatre, and the pedestrian traffic light was on red, and there were 5 people waiting next to me. And one person started to cross because there were no cars coming. One person started to walk across when it was showing red. And another person, the person on my other side, started walking across. And then another person started walking across. And soon I gave in and started walking across too. And I said, that's an example. It's a little story. Happens all the time. You see it in the street every day. But it's an example of peer pressure and how influence of others can affect the way you behave. And the message then is we need to be aware in clinical practice that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And even if other people are doing things the wrong way, we have to stand firm. So that's, I mean, that's a true story. So true stories are good ways to do it. And if we're on the lookout for little anecdotes of life, we can often get a little collection of them that are helpful.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Dr. Aya Mumbai from India, and he's thanking you for this wonderful presentation. And he would like to find out, in an attempt, would the presenter need to cover all of the home take messages or concentrate or restrict just to the few?
So do we have to cover all the messages or just a few? And I guess that depends really on how long you've got. And if you have a limited amount of time, you might want to list, these are the 10 things I think matter, and this is the order 1 to 10, and these are the 6 I'm going to get across, and this is the logical order I'm going to construct them in so that one flows from the other. So it's a matter of looking at the time, but it's a big temptation for all of us to give too much information too fast and slide with too much data, because we feel we've got to get the knowledge across. And if we're giving handouts or references, if people are really interested, then they can read the handout, look at the references. But the aim is really to inspire the audience, give them a feel that they want more, and help them to understand some key concepts. So I'd limit the number rather than try and cover the whole area, depending on the time. But thanks for that question.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Anas Mohammed Nafi, and the question stands as follows: How can we get the attention of the adult audience, especially when presenting critical points? I suppose that goes back to your point where you try to engage the audience and make it simple. And
yes, I'm not sure I can add much to that, but I think it's a pretty rare speaker that engages the whole audience. It's got to be somebody really brilliant, and most of us can't do that. I certainly can't. So we have to engage as many of them as we can and make it as interesting and relevant as we can. I think making it relevant to their needs is important, but of course they're there for different reasons. Some are there because they were told to go, others were there because they wanted to meet a friend at morning tea. So they have different motivations, and I think we have to accept that. I think all we can do is make it as interesting and relevant as possible, based on what they need to know. And we can find out what they need to know by learning a bit about them in advance, talking to the conference organisers, talking to some of the other speakers, for what level of education they're at. But none of this is easy, and none of it's perfect, and none of us get it perfect. So, but we can all get better.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Marianne Calnan, and she's asking, are there any simple ways to make a highly technical messages less technical and more friendly for non-technical people?
Marianne, thank you. How can we make technical message simple for non-technical people? Uh, I, th I think it can be done. I think it's good to try to explain your message, and this is part of the preparation of the talk. Try to explain it to a lay person. Try to explain it to a colleague in a different profession, or to somebody you have coffee with. It does help. One of the problems we have, if we're mixing all the time with people with similar knowledge, we do tend to talk in jargon and abbreviations and rattle off concepts that we just understand, but the lady you're having coffee with mightn't understand. So I've always found it helpful to talk to people, and my wife's a great source of this because her profession's totally different, and I explain things to her, and once she's got it, I think, well, that's a smart person from another profession can understand it, so I've probably got it right. So yeah, that's one way to do it, but some concepts are so complicated, it is difficult.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Bruno Lucid from France, and he's asking, what about the Q&A session, and especially questions when it is impossible to understand? So you really can't understand what the participant of your session is asking.
Yes, and that's I'm sure that's happened to all of us. So we can ask them to repeat the question. We can say, I didn't quite understand that. I'm awfully sorry. Would you mind saying it again? And that's all right to do. And it's always good to repeat the question anyhow. That's good for the audience, and it's also good for you because it gives you, while you're repeating the question, it gives you time to think of the answer. And I find with long questions, I usually stand there with a pen and jot down the key points because, I mean, you probably will have far better memories than I have, but if it's a question with 3 points in it, I'm struggling to remember point 2, and certainly never remember point 3. But it's okay to ask for clarification. And of course, not everybody who's asking a question really knows what they're asking, so sometimes people just don't get it.
Thank you. The next question is from Kamath Ramesh, and he's thanking you for this wonderful presentation. He would like to know about the use of natural humor during the presentation. What is your own experience, and how should it be planned?
Yes, my experience in using natural humor, I assume, means humor.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think as I suggested earlier, it's good to use. We have to be careful about it. We have to remember the aim of the talk is to help the audience understand some concepts that are going to be important for their education. The aim isn't to let them know what a funny person I am. So we've got to use humour the right amount in the right context, and be fairly careful with an international audience who have quite different concepts of humour, and certainly the simultaneous translation, as I mentioned before. It's good, it has its place. Self-effacing humour that's a story against yourself, is often very effective. Particularly when we're talking about quality and safety, it's often good to tell an audience, if it's a younger audience or an audience that's learning, about errors we made. And particularly if we're fairly senior, it's good for people to know of some really silly thing you did when you were younger, and in fact we all make mistakes, and we learn from them. And when we talk about a mistake we've made, it's good to say, and this is what I learned from it.
Thank you, Kim.
So humor's got a place.
Thank you. I have mentioned that Shardo Das is trying to pick up on the arrows, and he's quite active. One of his pickups is that the use of red in some of the cultures is not appropriate. So he picked up that some of your slides, to highlight the point, had the wording highlighted in red. So is that an intended arrow, Kim?
That was an error due to ignorance. Thank you for picking that up. No, I didn't realise that. No, I've learned something really useful there. That's very good to know. Yeah.
Next one is from Marianne Street. I'm sure it was an intended arrow. Next one is from Marianne Street again, and she is thanking you for comments that you have on her previous question, and she is looking to find out about talking about presenter talking about himself or herself. Sometimes talking about your own journey is interesting, but how do you know when you're saying too much about yourself?
Yes. How do you know when you're saying too much about yourself? I think it depends on your personality, doesn't it, really? If you're a person who's very self-important, you might talk about yourself far more than you need to. So it sounds trite to say stay humble, but I think that's important. And stories against yourself are good. Stories about how you did something wonderful, unless that's the aim of the whole talk. You know, how I did the first cardiac transplant in the world. You've clearly got to tell that story. But stories against yourself are better. And keep them short. I would think that's the main thing. I think it's just coming back to what's the talk all about? Is the talk about me, or is the talk about helping you to get a better understanding of the topic I'm discussing? And if we keep that in the front of our mind, it's like patient care. You know, medical care is all about the patient. It's not all about the doctor. Sometimes doctors get confused about that.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Alaton Adola from Nigeria, and the question is that some phone types are more destructive than the others. Is there any particular recommendation as to what font type to use at your PowerPoint?
Yes, that's a useful question. I think as long as it's clear and simple and can easily be read. And as you know, if you scroll through the various font types available, some are very fancy and very distracting. So just very clear and simple, and big font as well. There's no reason why we're given the whole screen. We might as well use it. Now you can see this last slide I've got up. It says questions and comments. It's only got the bottom third of the screen. So perhaps I should have made that larger. But I'd have font as big as possible and just a clear, simple font, and avoid all the fancy stuff.
Thank you, Kim. The next is Alexia Costa. She was probably looking for the errors within your presentation as well, and she's asking, don't you think that more images could engage the public better? I do prefer presentations that brings images to think about the link to the subject of the matter.
I think that's very good. I think images are really helpful. Now I have to confess that one of the reasons why I don't have many images is that I have very limited technical skills, and my PowerPoint skills aren't very good. So I'm not very good at inserting images. So they can be good, and you could certainly have more images. I think that the trap is that the images mustn't distract from the message. So use them by all means, use good ones, but not so many and so varied that the point is lost. But I agree, and there certainly could have been more good images in this presentation if I knew how to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim. I think we will be concluding on this session today. It's getting a bit late for you in Australia, so we would like to thank you for this fantastic presentation today. I'm sure, and personally myself, I have picked up a lot of it, and I'm sure our participants did as well. So thank you for finding time for preparing this presentation and delivering it today. Also would like to remind everybody that the recording of this webinar will be available on the ISQua website within 24 hours of an actual webinar taking place, and it will also be available on the learning management system for those who missed it. So I would like also to thank the audience for being so active today and for asking a number of questions and for making it really interactive presentation. Kim, thank you again, and good night to you.
Good night. My pleasure. Thank you. Good night.